Unexpected encounter. The incessant buzz of Alexander Ree's smartphone pulled him from a fitful sleep. Groggily, he fumbled for the device on the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen in the darkness of his hotel room. It was 3:47 a.m. "Mr. Rees?" The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, despite the hour. "This is Jameson from the Singapore office. I apologize for the early call, but there's been a development with the merger. The Cheng Group is threatening to pull out unless we can guarantee." Alex pinched the bridge of his nose, forcing himself to focus. "I understand, Jameson. Give me 10 minutes to get to my laptop, and we'll sort this out." As he ended the call, Alex let out a weary sigh. At 42, he was at the pinnacle of his career, CEO of Reeves International, a multinational corporation with tentacles in everything from tech to real estate. The past decade had been a relentless climb, each success propelling him further from the modest beginnings he'd left behind in his hometown of Millbrook. Padding across the plush carpet of his suite at the Ritz-Carlton, Alex flicked on the lights and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Singapore's skyline glittered before him, a testament to human ambition and progress. It was a view he'd seen countless times from countless luxury hotels around the world. Sometimes, in moments like these, he wondered if it had all been worth it. The next few hours were a blur of conference calls, rapid-fire emails, and tense negotiations. By the time the sun began to paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, Alex had salvaged the deal, but exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. "I need some air," he muttered to himself, deciding that a walk might clear his head before the day's meetings began in earnest. The streets of Singapore were already humming with life as Alex stepped out of the hotel. He'd forgone his usual tailored suit for a simple polo shirt and slacks, hoping to blend in with the early morning crowd. A light mist hung in the air, softening the edges of the city's sleek architecture. Alex let his feet carry him aimlessly, relishing the rare moment of anonymity. He found himself in a small park where elderly men and women were going through the graceful motions of Tai Chi. The sight brought a faint smile to his lips, a reminder of simpler pleasures. As he turned to leave, a flash of movement caught his eye. A woman was hurrying along the park's edge, her gait unsteady. Even from a distance, Alex could see that her clothes were worn and ill-fitting. She stumbled, catching herself against a tree, and in that moment, her face turned towards him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Sophie." The name escaped his lips in a whisper, heavy with disbelief. It couldn't be her. And yet, memories crashed over him like a tidal wave. Sophie Laurent, his first love, his best friend, the girl he'd planned to marry before life and ambition had pulled them in different directions. He hadn't seen or spoken to her in nearly 20 years, but he'd recognized those eyes anywhere. Before he could process what he was doing, Alex found himself moving towards her. "Sophie," he called out, louder this time. The woman's head snapped up, eyes wide with a mix of recognition and fear. She took a stumbling step backward, then another, before turning and fleeing with surprising speed. "Wait," Alex called out, but she was already disappearing around a corner. Heart pounding, he gave chase. The rational part of his brain told him this was madness. He had meetings to prepare for, a multi-billion-dollar company to run. But for once, Alexander Reeves wasn't listening to reason. He rounded the corner, fanning the busy street for any sign of her. There, a flash of faded blue disappearing into an alley. Alex dodged through the morning traffic, ignoring the blaring horns and angry shouts. The alley was a stark contrast to the gleaming streets he'd left behind. Overflowing dumpsters lined the walls, and the air was thick with the stench of rotting food and stagnant water. Alex slowed his pace, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look. "Sophie," he called out softly, peering into the shadows. "It's me, Alex. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." A shuffling sound came from behind a stack of discarded pallets. Slowly, a figure emerged. It was her. There was no doubt now. But the woman before him bore little resemblance to the vivacious girl he'd once known. Sophie's once lustrous hair hung in limp, greasy strands around a gaunt face. Her clothes were little more than rags, hanging off a frame that seemed impossibly thin. But it was her eyes that truly shocked him. Once bright with laughter and dreams, they now held a wary, haunted look. "Alex," her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" The question hung between them, loaded with 2 decades of unspoken history. Alex struggled to find the right words, acutely aware of the vast gulf that now separated them. I'm in town for business," he finally managed, the explanation sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Sophie, what happened? How did you end up?" He gestured helplessly, unable to finish the question. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Life happened, Alex. Isn't that what you always used to say? Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans." The quote, thrown back at him from their shared past, hit Alex like a physical blow. He took a tentative step forward, but Sophie flinched away. "Don't," she said, holding up a trembling hand. "Just don't. You should go. I'm sure you have important things to do." "Nothing is more important than this," Alex insisted, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Sophie, please, let me help you. Whatever's happened, we can fix it. I have resources, connections." "Fix it." Sophie's laugh was harsher this time, edged with something that might have been hysteria. "You can't fix this, Alex. You can't fix me. I'm not one of your business deals or charity cases. I'm nothing. Nobody." "That's not true," Alex said fiercely. "You're Sophie Laurent. You're the girl who taught me how to skip stones on Miller's Pond. The one who stayed up all night helping me cram for our calculus final. The woman He broke off, the weight of unspoken feelings catching in his throat. Sophie's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of the girl he'd known shining through. But just as quickly, the walls slammed back into place. "That girl is gone, Alex. She died a long time ago." Sophie's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Go back to your life. Forget you saw me. It's better that way." Before Alex could protest, she darted past him with surprising agility, disappearing into the maze of alleys beyond. He started to follow, but the sound of his phone ringing brought him up short. Reality came crashing back. He was supposed to be in a meeting. He checked his watch and swore softly. 15 minutes ago. For a long moment, Alex stood frozen, torn between 2 worlds. The insistent buzz of his phone demanded his attention, reminding him of responsibilities and obligations. But the image of Sophie, gaunt, desperate, broken, burned in his mind. With a deep breath, Alex made a decision. He answered the phone. "Jameson, I need you to clear my schedule for the next few days. Something's come up, a personal matter." "No, everything's fine. I just need some time to handle this. I'll be in touch." As he ended the call, Alex looked down the alley where Sophie had vanished. He had no idea where to start, how to find her again in this sprawling city. But he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he couldn't walk away, not this time. Whatever had happened to Sophie, whatever had led her to this point, Alex was determined to uncover the truth, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to make things right. With renewed purpose, he stepped out of the alley and into the bustling streets of Singapore. The day was young, and he had a mission. Somewhere in this city was the key to understanding how the bright, ambitious girl he'd once loved had ended up lost and alone. As he hailed a taxi, Alex's mind raced with possibilities. He'd need to be careful. Sophie clearly didn't want to be found. But he had resources at his disposal, and more importantly, he had determination. "Where to, sir?" the taxi driver asked as Alex slid into the back seat. For a moment, Alex hesitated. Then, with a firm nod, he gave the address of his hotel. He'd need to gather some things, make some calls. This wasn't going to be a quick or easy task. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Alex's gaze swept the streets, searching for any sign of Sophie. He knew the odds were slim, but he couldn't help himself. Somewhere out there, she was struggling alone, and he was going to change that, no matter what it took. The rest of the world could wait. For now, Alexander Rees had a new mission, one that money couldn't buy and success couldn't guarantee. He was going to find Sophie Laurent, and in doing so, perhaps find a part of himself he'd lost along the way. The Singapore skyline loomed ahead, a glittering maze of possibilities and secrets. Somewhere in its shadows, a story was waiting to be uncovered, and Alex was determined to see it through to the end, wherever it might lead. Unraveling the past. Alexander Rees sat in his hotel suite, his fingers hovering over the keyboard of his laptop. The room's opulence felt suddenly stifling, a stark contrast to the grimy alley where he'd encountered Sophie just hours ago. With a deep breath, he began to type, delving into the past he'd left behind 2 decades earlier. As he worked, memories flooded back, vivid and bittersweet. Millbrook, Connecticut, summer 2004. The humid July air clung to Alex's skin as he jogged down Elm Street, the familiar houses of his childhood neighborhood blurring past. He was running late, again, but he couldn't bring himself to care. It was the summer before college, a time suspended between the familiar comforts of home and the looming unknown of adulthood. As he rounded the corner onto Maple Drive, he saw her. Sophie Laurent was perched on the front steps of her family's modest colonial, a book open on her lap. She looked up at the sound of his approach, a smile spreading across her face. "You're late, Rees," she called out, but there was no reproach in her tone. Alex grinned, slowing to a walk as he approached. "Sorry, got caught up helping Dad at the store. You know how it is on inventory days." Sophie nodded, her expression softening. She knew all too well the pressures Alex faced at home. The Rees family hardware store had been a Millbrook institution for 3 generations, and everyone expected Alex to take over one day. Everyone except Sophie, who saw the restless ambition burning behind his eyes. "So," she said, closing her book and standing up, "are you ready to make some memories?" Alex's grin widened. "Lead the way, Laurent." They set off down the street, falling into the easy rhythm of best friends who'd known each other since childhood. Their destination was Miller's Pond, a secluded spot on the outskirts of town that had been their refuge for years. As they walked, Alex couldn't help but steal glances at Sophie. She'd always been pretty, but lately he'd found himself noticing details he'd overlooked before, the way the sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the light dusting of freckles across her nose, the graceful curve of her neck. Earth to Alex, Sophie's voice broke through his reverie. "Where'd you go just now?" Alex felt heat rise to his cheeks. "Sorry, just thinking." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "About?" "The future, I guess," Alex replied, only half lying. "College, what comes after? It's all happening so fast, you know." Sophie's expression grew serious. "Yeah, I know. But hey, we've got a plan, right? You, me, NYU in the fall, taking on the Big Apple together." Alex nodded, but a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. He hadn't told her yet, couldn't bring himself to, about the letter that had arrived yesterday, the one from Stanford, offering him a full scholarship. They reached Miller's Pond, the water a sheet of liquid gold in the late afternoon sun. Without hesitation, Sophie kicked off her shoes and waded in, laughing as the cool water lapped at her calves. "Come on, slowpoke," she called back to Alex. "Or are you too grown up for a little summer fun?" The challenge in her voice was impossible to resist. Alex stripped off his t-shirt and plunged in after her, sending up a spray of water that had Sophie shrieking with laughter. For a while, they were kids again, splashing, dunking each other, racing to the floating dock in the middle of the pond. But as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, a different energy settled over them. They floated on their backs, fingers barely touching, staring up at the darkening sky. "Alex?" Sophie's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Yeah. Promise me something." Alex turned his head to look at her, struck by the vulnerability in her expression. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, we'll always find our way back to each other. The weight of her words hung in the air between them. Alex felt something shift, a subtle realignment of their relationship that both thrilled and terrified him. I promise, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie's fingers intertwined with his, and in that moment, Alex knew with absolute certainty that he was in love with his best friend. The memory faded, leaving Alex staring at his computer screen, a lump forming in his throat. He'd kept that promise, hadn't he? He was here, trying to find her, to help her, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that it was too little, too late. With renewed determination, Alex dove back into his research. He scoured social media, news archives, and public records, looking for any trace of Sophie Laurent over the past 2 decades. But it was as if she'd vanished into thin air after their freshman year of college. As the hours ticked by, Alex's mind drifted to another pivotal moment in their shared history. New York City, December 2004. The dorm room was a mess of half-packed boxes and discarded papers. Alex sat on his bed, head in his hands, as Sophie paced back and forth, her voice rising with each word. Stanford. You're transferring to Stanford, and you're just telling me this now, 2 weeks before the end of the semester. Alex looked up, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. I got the confirmation yesterday. Sophie, this is a huge opportunity. The internship at Silicon Valley, the connections I'll make. What about our plans? Sophie interrupted, her eyes flashing with hurt and anger. What about NYU, the apartment we were going to get next year? What about us? The last word hung in the air, loaded with all the unspoken feelings that had been building between them for months. Alex stood, reaching for her, but Sophie stepped back. Soph, please. This doesn't change anything. We can make it work. Long-distance relationships. Long distance. Sophie's laugh was bitter. Alex, be realistic. You'll be on the other side of the country, building your big dreams. Where does that leave me? You could come with me, Alex suggested, desperation creeping into his voice. Transfer to Berkeley or... That's not the point. Sophie exploded. The point is, you made this huge decision without even talking to me, without considering how it would affect us. I thought I meant more to you than that. The hurt in her voice was like a knife to Alex's heart. You do, Sophie. You mean everything to me. But this is my future we're talking about. I can't pass up an opportunity like this. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the floor. When she finally looked up, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. You're right. It is your future, and I guess I'm not a part of it. Sophie, no. But she was already moving towards the door, grabbing her coat. I hope Stanford gives you everything you're looking for, Alex. I really do. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Alex alone in the suddenly too quiet room. He wanted to run after her, to explain, to make her understand. But something held him back, pride, maybe, or the conviction that he was making the right choice for his future. He never could have imagined in that moment how much he would come to regret letting her walk away. Back in the present, Alex leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The guilt and regret he carried for years felt fresh again, sharpened by the image of Sophie in that alley. What had happened to her after that day? How had her bright future unraveled so completely? And more importantly, how could he make things right? A notification on his laptop drew his attention. One of his searches had turned up a result, a small article in a local Connecticut newspaper from 2006. Alex's heart raced as he clicked on the link. The headline made his blood run cold. Local woman missing, foul play suspected. As he read the article, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Sophie had dropped out of NYU shortly after their fight, returning home to Millbrook. She'd been working at a local diner, trying to figure out her next move, when she'd suddenly vanished without a trace. The article mentioned a boyfriend, someone named Ryan Crawford, who was a person of interest in her disappearance. But the trail had gone cold, and Sophie Laurent had become just another unsolved mystery. Alex's mind reeled. How had he not known about this? Why hadn't anyone contacted him? But even as he asked himself these questions, he knew the answer. He'd been so caught up in his own ambitions, his new life at Stanford, that he'd lost touch with everyone from his old life, including Sophie's family. With shaking hands, Alex reached for his phone. It was time to make some calls, to reconnect with people he'd left behind years ago. Someone somewhere had to know more about what had happened to Sophie. As he dialed the first number, Alex made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. And somehow, someway, he would find a way to keep the promise he'd made on that summer day so long ago. The phone rang once, twice. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. Whatever came next, he knew his life would never be the same. Hello. A familiar voice answered, tinged with age but unmistakable. Alex took a deep breath. Mrs. Laurent, it's Alex Rees. I need to talk to you about Sophie. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and in that moment, Alex knew that the journey he was about to embark on would be far more complex and dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Reaching out, the Singapore sun had long since set, casting the city in a neon-tinged glow that filtered through the windows of Alex's hotel suite. He sat motionless, phone still clutched in his hand, replaying the conversation with Mrs. Laurent over and over in his mind. Alex. Her voice had been a mixture of surprise and wariness. It's been a long time. I know, Mrs. Laurent. I'm so sorry for losing touch. I saw Sophie today, here in Singapore. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line had been unmistakable. That's impossible. Sophie is missing. Alex had finished for her. I know. I found the article. But I swear to you it was her. She's alive, but she's in trouble. I need to understand what happened. Please, can you tell me anything? What followed was a painful recounting of the years Alex had missed. Sophie's struggles after dropping out of NYU, the troubled relationship with Ryan Crawford, the day she vanished without a trace, the fruitless police investigation, the years of agonizing uncertainty. We never stopped looking, Mrs. Laurent had said, her voice thick with emotion. But after a while we had to try to move on. For our own sanity, Alex had promised to keep her updated, to let her know the moment he found Sophie again. But as he ended the call, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. He had opened old wounds for the Laurents. Now he had to make it count. With renewed determination, Alex turned back to his laptop. He had a name now, Ryan Crawford, and a time frame to work with. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Hours passed in a blur of searches, phone calls, and increasingly convoluted chains of connections. Alex leveraged every resource at his disposal, calling in favors from contacts around the globe. As a CEO of a multinational corporation, doors opened for him that would have remained firmly shut for others. It was nearing dawn when Alex finally uncovered a lead that made his heart race. Ryan Crawford had left the United States shortly after Sophie's disappearance, bouncing from country to country across Southeast Asia, and his last known location, as of 6 months ago, was right here in Singapore. Alex's hands hovered over the keyboard, a plan already forming in his mind. He could hire private investigators, alert the local authorities, set up a citywide search. A soft chime from his phone interrupted his thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. Stop digging. You're putting her in danger. Meet me at the Merlion Park. 1 hour. Alex stared at the message, his mind racing. It could be a trap, or it could be the break he'd been hoping for. Either way, he knew he had to go. 45 minutes later, Alex found himself standing at the edge of Merlion Park, the iconic statue looming behind him as he scanned the pre-dawn crowd. A mix of early morning joggers and late-night revelers milled about, but none seemed to be paying him any particular attention. "You're a hard man to discourage, Mr. Reeves." Alex whirled around to find a petite woman with close-cropped hair and sharp eyes regarding him coolly. She was dressed inconspicuously in jeans and a plain t-shirt, but something in her stance spoke of barely contained energy. "Who are you?" Alex demanded. "Do you know where Sophie is?" The woman held up a hand. "Not here. Follow me." She set off at a brisk pace, weaving through the slowly awakening city with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with its rhythms. Alex followed, his long strides easily keeping up with her. They ended up in a small, nondescript cafe tucked away in a side street. The woman led him to a booth in the back, well away from the windows. Only when they were seated, with steaming cups of coffee in front of them, did she speak again. "My name is Mai. I work for an organization that helps people disappear, people who need to start over to escape dangerous situations." Alex leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "And Sophie, is she one of these people?" Mai nodded slowly. "She came to us nearly 2 years ago. She was, in a bad way, scared, malnourished, clearly running from something or someone." "Ryan Crawford," Alex said, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. "Among others," Mai confirmed. "Your friend, Sophie, she got mixed up with some very dangerous people. Crawford was just the beginning. When she tried to get out, they came after her. Hard." Alex's mind reeled. The Sophie he knew, bright, ambitious, full of life, how had she ended up in such a nightmare? But even as he asked himself the question, a voice in the back of his mind whispered an uncomfortable truth. "You weren't there. You don't know what she went through." "We helped her establish a new identity," Mai continued. "Got her set up with a job, a place to live. For a while, it seemed like she was starting to rebuild her life. But then? Then what?" Alex prompted when Mai trailed off. Mai sighed, looking suddenly weary. She relapsed. The trauma, the stress of constantly looking over her shoulder, it was too much. She turned to drugs to cope. "We tried to help, but, well, you've seen her condition." Alex's hands clenched into fists under the table. The image of Sophie in that alley, gaunt and haunted, flashed through his mind. "I want to help her," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes. I have resources, connections." "Mr. Reeves," Mai cut him off, her voice gentle but firm. "I understand you want to make things right, but you need to understand the gravity of the situation. The people after Sophie, they're still out there, and they have long memories and longer reach. Your sudden interest in finding her has not gone unnoticed." A chill ran down Alex's spine. "Are you saying I've put her in more danger?" Mai nodded gravely. "By stirring up old ghosts, you've potentially compromised her safety, and yours." Alex sat back, the weight of Mai's words settling over him like a shroud. He charged in, confident in his ability to fix things with money and influence. But this was so far beyond anything he'd imagined. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mai studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small, unmarked flip phone. "Take this. It's a secure line. I'll contact you if there's a way you can help without putting Sophie at further risk. But for now, the best thing you can do is go back to your life. Act normal. Pretend this conversation never happened." Alex took the phone, turning it over in his hands. It felt inadequate, this small piece of plastic and circuitry, against the magnitude of what he'd learned. But he nodded, understanding the necessity of caution. As they stood to leave, Mai placed a hand on his arm. "Mr. Reeves, Alex, I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but believe me when I say that by walking away now, you might be doing more to help Sophie than you realize." Alex met her gaze, seeing the sincerity and the warning in her eyes. "I understand," he said softly, "but I'm not giving up on her. I can't. Not again." Mai's expression softened slightly. She's lucky to have someone who cares so much. Just be careful, for both your sakes." With that, she was gone, slipping out of the cafe and disappearing into the now bustling streets of Singapore. Alex remained for a moment, the weight of everything he'd learned pressing down on him. As he finally stepped out into the morning sun, Alex's mind was racing. He had promised to back off, to return to his normal life. But the thought of Sophie out there, alone and in danger, was unbearable. No, he decided as he hailed a taxi back to his hotel. He wouldn't give up. He couldn't. But he would have to be smarter, more cautious. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. Back in his suite, Alex looked out over the Singapore skyline, the city now fully awake and humming with energy. Somewhere out there, Sophie was fighting her own battles, and whether she knew it or not, she wasn't alone anymore. Alex pulled out his phone, his regular one, and dialed his assistant. "Cancel my flights," he said when she answered, "and clear my schedule for the next month. I'm extending my stay in Singapore, indefinitely." As he ended the call, Alex's gaze fell on the secure phone Mai had given him. It sat silent on the desk, a tangible link to Sophie and the dangerous world she now inhabited. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "I'm here, Sophie," he whispered to the silent device. "And this time, I'm not going anywhere." The phone remained stubbornly quiet, offering no answers. But as Alex turned back to the window, watching the city below, he felt a fierce resolve settle over him. Whatever came next, whatever dangers lay ahead, he was ready to face them. For Sophie, for the promise he'd made all those years ago, and for the chance to right the wrongs of the past. The game had changed, the stakes raised beyond anything he could have imagined. But Alexander Rees was nothing if not adaptable. As the sun climbed higher in the Singapore sky, he began to plan his next move in a game where the rules were unknown, and the consequences could be deadly. Hidden truths. The weeks that followed Alex's clandestine meeting with Mai blurred together in a haze of carefully orchestrated normalcy. By day, he attended to his business affairs, took meetings, and made a show of exploring Singapore as any visiting CEO might. But beneath this veneer of routine, Alex's mind never strayed far from thoughts of Sophie and the dangerous web she was entangled in. The secure phone Mai had given him remained stubbornly silent, offering no updates, no guidance. Alex found himself checking it obsessively, hoping for any sign that his patience was paying off. But as days stretched into weeks, the silence became increasingly maddening. It was on a muggy Tuesday afternoon, nearly a month after his arrival in Singapore, that everything changed. Alex was in the middle of a video conference with his New York office when the secure phone vibrated, nearly causing him to drop it in surprise. "Gentlemen, something urgent has come up," he said, barely managing to keep his voice steady. "We'll have to reconvene later." He ended the call before anyone could protest, his heart racing as he flipped open the basic phone. A single text message glowed on the screen. "Botanic Gardens, Orchid Garden, 1 hour." Alex was out the door in minutes, barely pausing to grab his wallet and room key. The taxi ride to the gardens felt interminable, every red light an eternity. When they finally arrived, Alex all but threw his fare at the driver before hurrying towards the orchid garden. The lush greenery and riot of colorful blooms were lost on Alex as he scanned the paths and secluded corners for any sign of Mai or Sophie. He was so focused on his search that he almost missed the slight figure seated on a bench partially obscured by a curtain of hanging vines. "Sophie," he breathed, hardly daring to believe it. The woman looked up and Alex felt his heart constrict. It was her, undoubtedly, but the past month had not been kind. Her cheeks were even more hollow than before, dark circles bruising the skin beneath her eyes. But it was the defeat in her gaze that truly shook him. "Hello, Alex," Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." Alex moved towards her, fighting the urge to gather her into his arms. Instead, he sat beside her on the bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I had to," he said simply. "Sophie, Don't, she cut him off, a flicker of the old fire in her eyes. Don't apologize. Don't try to fix this. You can't. Let me try, Alex pleaded. Whatever's happened, whatever you were mixed up in, we can figure it out. Together. Sophie laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that seemed to echo in the quiet garden. You don't get it, do you? This isn't some problem you can throw money at, Alex. These people, they'll kill you without a second thought, just for talking to me. Then why agree to meet? Alex asked, genuinely puzzled. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on a nearby orchid. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Because I'm tired, Alex. So damn tired. Of running, of hiding, of being alone. The admission seemed to cost her, and Alex watched as she visibly retreated into herself, shoulders hunching as if to ward off a blow. Tell me, he said softly. Tell me everything, please. And so, in fits and starts, Sophie began to unravel the tangled web of her past. She spoke of her struggles after dropping out of NYU, of feeling lost and directionless, of meeting Ryan Crawford at a low point in her life, believing his charm and promises of adventure. He was exciting, Sophie said, her voice hollow. Dangerous, but in a way that felt thrilling at first. I thought I was in love. But the excitement had quickly soured. Ryan, it turned out, was deeply involved in a complex network of drug trafficking and money laundering. What had started as a whirlwind romance quickly devolved into a nightmare of coercion and abuse. I wanted out, Sophie continued, her hands twisting in her lap. But by then, I knew too much. They made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. Alex listened, horror and guilt warring within him as Sophie recounted her desperate escape attempt, the years spent looking over her shoulder, the brief respite offered by May's organization, and the eventual spiral into addiction that led her to the streets of Singapore. And now, Alex asked gently when Sophie fell silent. She met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Now, I'm out of options. Ryan's people, they found me. They're here, in Singapore. It's only a matter of time before. She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Alex felt a surge of protective anger, unlike anything he'd experienced before. No, he said firmly. I won't let that happen. Sophie, listen to me. I have resources, connections. We can fight this. Sophie shook her head, a sad smile playing at her lips. Always the optimist, aren't you, Alex? Some things never change. I mean it, Alex insisted, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? The question hung between them, laden with years of history and regret. Sophie studied him, searching his face for something. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Relief flooded through Alex, quickly followed by a steely determination. First things first, he said, standing and offering her his hand. Let's get you somewhere safe. As Sophie hesitantly took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet, Alex's mind was already racing with plans. He would need to be careful, strategic. The enemies they faced were not to be underestimated. But as they walked out of the orchid garden together, Sophie's hand still in his, Alex felt a fierce hope looming in his chest. They had a long, dangerous road ahead of them, but for the first time in years, neither of them was walking it alone. As they exited the Botanic Gardens, Alex's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and felt his blood run cold. It was Jameson, his VP of operations, and the caller ID photo showed him standing in the lobby of Alex's hotel in Singapore. Mr. Reeves? Jameson's voice was tense. We have a situation. There are some gentlemen here asking about you. They don't look friendly, sir. Alex's grip on Sophie's hand tightened. Jameson, listen carefully. Do not tell them anything. I'm not there. You don't know where I am. Understood? Yes, sir. But. No buts. Your priority is to keep yourself and our staff safe. I'll handle this. Thank you for the warning. He ended the call and turned to Sophie, whose face had drained of what little color it had. "They're here," she whispered, terror evident in her voice. "It's okay," Alex said, trying to project a calm he didn't entirely feel. "I have a plan. Do you trust me?" Sophie hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "I trust you." "Good," Alex said, already dialing another number on his phone, because things are about to get complicated. As they hurried towards the street, Alex's mind raced with possibilities. The game had changed once again, the stakes higher than ever. But as he glanced at Sophie, saw the mix of fear and hope in her eyes, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This time, he wasn't going to let her down. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices he had to make, he would see this through. The hidden truths of the past had come to light, and now it was time to face them head-on. The future was uncertain, fraught with danger. But for the first time in years, it also held the promise of redemption, for both of them. A new beginning. The sleek private jet cut through the night sky, its luxurious interior a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. Alex sat across from Sophie, watching as she gazed out the window at the endless expanse of stars. In the 48 hours since their meeting in the Botanic Gardens, their world had been turned upside down. Alex's mind raced as he replayed the events that had led them here. "I need an extraction. 2 people. Highest level of security." Alex's voice was low and urgent as he spoke into his phone, guiding Sophie through the crowded streets away from the Botanic Gardens. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice responded crisply. "Understood, Mr. Rees. Coordinates." Alex rattled off their location, his free hand never leaving the small of Sophie's back as he steered her through the throng of tourists and locals. ETA 10 minutes. Look for a red Mercedes, license plate SGX 2774. The call ended abruptly, and Alex turned to Sophie, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Alex, what's going on? Who was that?" He managed a reassuring smile. "An insurance policy I never thought I'd have to use. We're getting out of here, Sophie. Together." What followed was a blur of motion and adrenaline. The red Mercedes arrived precisely on time, whisking them away to a private airstrip on the outskirts of the city. Alex's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Jameson and other executives, but he ignored them all. As they boarded the waiting jet, Alex caught sight of a news alert on his phone. The headline made his blood run cold. Tech CEO Alexander Rees missing, foul play suspected. He showed it to Sophie, whose face paled. "Alex, what have you done?" He took her hand, squeezing it gently. "What I should have done years ago. I'm choosing you, Sophie. Everything else, we'll figure it out." Now, as the jet carried them to a destination known only to the pilot, Alex found himself grappling with the magnitude of his decision. He had effectively abandoned his life, his career, everything he had built over the past 2 decades. And yet, looking at Sophie across from him, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "You're staring," Sophie said softly, turning from the window to meet his gaze. Alex smiled, a bit sheepishly. "Sorry, it's just, part of me still can't believe you're really here." Sophie's expression softened, but there was still a wariness in her eyes. "Alex, we need to talk about what happens next. You've put yourself in incredible danger, your whole life." "My life was empty," Alex interrupted gently. "All the success, the money, none of it meant anything. Not compared to this, to you." Sophie shook her head, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "You can't just say things like that. It's been 20 years, Alex. We're not the same people we were back then." "I know," Alex acknowledged. "But that doesn't change how I feel. Sophie, I've spent the last 2 decades trying to fill a void that I didn't even fully understand. But seeing you again, even in these circumstances, it's like a part of me woke up." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. "And what about when you realize that I'm not the girl you remember? I've done things, Alex. Terrible things. To survive, to feed my addiction. I'm not clean." Alex moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. Then we'll face that together. I'm not saying it will be easy, but Sophie, don't you see? This is our chance at a new beginning, for both of us. Sophie looked down at their intertwined hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Alex. What if they find us? They won't, Alex said with a conviction he hoped masked his own fear. The people I contacted, they specialize in making people disappear. Permanently. Like May's organization. Alex nodded. Similar, but with, let's say, more resources at their disposal. We're going somewhere safe, somewhere we can start over. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, and Alex could almost see the wheels turning in her mind. Finally, she looked up, meeting his gaze with a determination that took his breath away. Okay, she said. Okay. But Alex, if we're doing this, if we're really starting over, there's something you need to know. About why I disappeared all those years ago. Alex felt his heart rate quicken. I'm listening. Sophie took a deep breath, steeling herself. After you left for Stanford, I found out I was pregnant. The words hit Alex like a physical blow. He stared at Sophie, his mind reeling. Pregnant? But why didn't you tell me? I tried, Sophie said, her voice thick with emotion. I called, I emailed. But you were always busy, always had some new project or internship. And then I lost the baby. Tears were flowing freely now, and Alex felt his own eyes stinging. Sophie, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. She shook her head. It's not your fault. But after that, I couldn't face anyone, couldn't face myself. That's when I met Rian. And well, you know the rest. Alex pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, grief for the child he never knew, anger at himself for not being there, and an overwhelming sense of protectiveness for the woman in his arms. As Sophie's sobs subsided, Alex gently tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. Thank you for telling me, he said softly. It doesn't change anything about how I feel or what I want for our future. If anything, it makes me more certain. Certain of what? Sophie asked, her voice small. That this is where I'm meant to be, with you. Whatever comes next, we face it together. For the first time since he'd found her in that alley, Sophie smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. Together, she repeated, as if testing out the word. As the jet continued its journey through the night sky, Alex and Sophie remained in each other's arms, the weight of their shared past giving way to the possibility of a shared future. They both knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Sophie's addiction, the danger that still lurked in the shadows, the life Alex had left behind, these were not obstacles that would disappear overnight. But as the first rays of dawn began to paint the horizon, Alex felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had been given a second chance, an opportunity for a new beginning. And this time, he was determined not to let it slip away. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent. Alex and Sophie exchanged a look, part excitement, part apprehension. Ready? Alex asked, squeezing her hand. Sophie took a deep breath, then nodded. Ready. As the plane began its descent into their new life, Alex knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them head-on. Together, they had a chance to rewrite their story, to create the future they had once only dreamed of. The new beginning they had both been searching for was finally within reach, and this time, they were determined to get it right. Transformation and redemption. The small coastal town of Puerto Viejo, Costa Rica, was a world away from the glittering skyscrapers of Singapore and the corporate boardrooms of New York. Here, lush rainforests met pristine beaches, and time seemed to move at a different pace. It was in this paradise that Alex and Sophie had begun to rebuild their lives over the past year. Their modest beachfront casa was a far cry from the luxury penthouses and five-star hotels Alex had once called home, but as he stood on the porch watching the sun rise over the Caribbean, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Coffee. Sophie's voice came from behind him, and Alex turned to see her holding out a steaming mug. "Thanks," he said, taking the cup and pulling her close with his free arm. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sky transformed from deep indigo to a palette of pinks and golds. So much had changed in the year since their daring escape. The first few months had been the hardest. Sophie's withdrawal from drugs had been a grueling process, testing both of their resolve. There were nights when Alex had held her as she shook and cried, nights when he'd wondered if they'd made the right choice. But slowly, surely, things had begun to improve. Sophie had thrown herself into recovery with a determination that both awed and inspired Alex. She attended meetings in the local community center, started practicing yoga on the beach, and even began volunteering at a nearby animal sanctuary. Alex, for his part, had grappled with the loss of his identity as a high-powered CEO. He'd gone from making multi-million-dollar decisions to helping local fishermen mend their nets and teaching English to kids in the village. It had been a humbling experience, but one that had brought him a sense of fulfillment he'd never known in his corporate life. "What are you thinking about?" Sophie asked, pulling Alex from his reverie. He smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just how far we've come, how different everything is now." Sophie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it, giving up everything?" Alex shook his head without hesitation. "Not for a second. This past year with you, it's been the happiest of my life." And it was true. Despite the challenges, despite the simplicity of their new life, Alex had never felt more at peace. The constant pressure, the never-ending chase for the next big deal, it all seemed so hollow now. "I got an email from Mai yesterday," Sophie said after a moment. "She says it's safe now. Ryan and his people, they've been taken care of." Alex felt a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying lift from his shoulders. That's good news. How do you feel about it?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Relieved, mostly, but also, I don't know. It feels like the final chapter of my old life closing. Like I can finally start looking forward without always glancing over my shoulder. Alex nodded, understanding completely. He'd had a similar feeling 6 months ago when news had broken of his company's merger with a larger tech giant. His disappearance had been a scandal at first, but life had moved on. The world had kept turning without Alexander Rees, the tech mogul. "So," he said, turning to face Sophie fully, "what does looking forward look like for you?" A slow smile spread across Sophie's face. "Well, for starters, I've been thinking about that idea we discussed, the eco-lodge." Alex felt a surge of excitement. They'd talked about it as a pipe dream at first, using Alex's business acumen and Sophie's newfound passion for conservation to create a sustainable tourism venture. But as the months had passed, the idea had begun to take shape, to feel more and more like a real possibility. "I think we should do it," Sophie continued. "I've already talked to some of the local landowners. There's a perfect spot just up the coast, and they're open to the idea of a partnership." Alex grinned, feeling a familiar spark of entrepreneurial spirit igniting within him. But this time, it wasn't about profit margins or market share. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would benefit the community that had taken them in and given them a second chance. "Let's do it," he said. "We'll start small, do it right. Make it a model of sustainable development." Sophie's eyes shone with excitement. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already started sketching out some ideas. Want to see?" As they bent over Sophie's notebook, discussing solar panels and grey water systems, Alex felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. This was what he'd been missing all those years, not just Sophie, but a sense of purpose that went beyond personal gain. The day progressed, a whirlwind of planning and dreaming. They walked the beaches, scouting locations and talking to locals about their idea. The enthusiasm they encountered was heartening, a reminder of the community they'd become a part of. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of orange and purple, Alex and Sophie found themselves back on their porch. Sophie was curled up in a hammock, sketching designs for eco-friendly bungalows, while Alex typed out a business plan on his laptop. "You know," Sophie said, looking up from her work, "a year ago, if someone had told me this is where we'd end up, I would have thought they were crazy." Alex chuckled. "You and me both, but I wouldn't change a thing." Sophie's expression grew serious. "Alex, I never properly thanked you. For saving me, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Alex set aside his laptop, moving to kneel beside the hammock. He took Sophie's hand in his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me too, Sophie. You showed me what really matters in life. And believing in you, that's the easiest thing I've ever done." Tears shimmered in Sophie's eyes as she leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "I love you, Alex Rees, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Sophie Laurent. Always have, always will." As they sealed their declaration with a kiss, the last rays of sunlight dipping below the horizon, Alex marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the ambitious teenagers dreaming of conquering the world, to lost souls struggling to find their way, and finally to this, two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption. Their story was far from over. The Eco Lodge was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with purpose and possibility. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but as Alex held Sophie close, listening to the rhythmic sound of the waves, he knew that together they could face anything. In the end, it wasn't wealth or success that had brought Alex true happiness. It was this, the love of a woman he'd never stopped caring for, a life rich in meaning rather than material possessions, and the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. As night fell over Puerto Viejo, stars twinkling to life in the vast Caribbean sky, Alex and Sophie remained on their porch, talking and planning well into the night. Their past had shaped them, their present had transformed them, and their future, well, their future was as bright and full of promise as the tropical dawn that would greet them in the morning. It was, in every sense, a new beginning, and this time they were going to make it count.